It is the early 1990s. Systems research and development programmer Kazuaki Morita is just coming off of the development for the Super Nintendo game A Link to the Past. Morita has worked on Super Mario Bros. 1, 2, and 3, and The Legend of Zelda 1 and 2. But now he's tinkering with a system he's never used before, the Game Boy. Morita is just experimenting after hours on the company's only development kit, curious to see what the system can do. Gradually, Morita's coworkers become interested in what he's developing and decide to help out, forming a sort of after-school club. One man is Yoshiaki Koizumi, who studied film in university and has only worked so far on game manuals and illustration. Eventually, Koizumi will be creating an entire story for the first time. He is joined by Kensuke Tanabe, who has been a director for the Super Mario Bros. Series, a scriptwriter for Link to the Past, and has an unrealized idea about the world ending when a massive egg breaks on top of a mountain. They are joined by Minako Hamano and Koizue Ishikawa, both of which will be composing game music for the first time. And finally, Takashi Tezuka, a director on the Super Mario and Zelda franchise, takes interest in the after-hours work and sees potential. Tezuka takes a hold of the project and its group of individuals doing things for the first time, and decides to make a pitch to turn this after-school project into a fully staffed game. The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening was the first Zelda game for the Nintendo Game Boy. It was released in June 1993 in Japan and August 1993 in North America. Whereas previous games in this series took place in Hyrule and revolved around saving Princess Zelda or acquiring the Triforce, Link's Awakening takes place on Koholint Island, and while it features a girl named Marin, you are instead focused on collecting 8 instruments in order to wake and save a creature known as the Windfish. In addition to the different premise, Link's Awakening also has a different spirit than the previous Zelda games. The original Legend of Zelda for the NES was intended as a pure adventure by producer and director Shigeru Miyamoto, who tried to recapture what he felt as a young boy exploring forests, lakes, and caves in Sonobe, Japan.
There's a place near Kobe where there's a mountain, and you climb the mountain, and there's a big lake near the top of it. We had gone on this hiking trip and climbed up the mountain, and I was so amazed. It was the first time I had ever experienced hiking up this mountain and seeing this big lake at the top. And I drew on that inspiration when we were working on the Legend of Zelda game, and we were creating this grand outdoor adventure where you go through these narrowed confined spaces and come upon this great lake. And so it was around that time that I really began to start drawing on my experiences as a child and bringing that into game development.
The game begins in an open area with 3 possible directions and 1 door. There are no prompts telling the player what to do. It is up to their discretion as to where they want to explore and what they want to do, just as a young Shigeru Miyamoto did as a boy. Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link added a linear aspect to its gameplay by adding side-scrolling to its towns, dungeons, and mob fights. The game begins with a single direction to go: right. Once you leave the initial room, you are on a top-down map with the freedom to explore similar to the first game. The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past is somewhat similar to the first Zelda, except that it begins with a call to adventure. Link wakes up hearing the voice of Princess Zelda asking to be rescued from the castle. Link must enter the castle and rescue Zelda from the dungeon before he can start his journey. The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening is the first game in the series to open with a cinematic. Immediately, the cinematic flips the traditional narrative of Zelda games. As the game begins, we see Link on a ship that is struck by lightning. We are not told that Link must rescue Princess Zelda. Instead, Link must be saved. As Marin shakes Link's unconscious body, high above in the distance, a mysterious large egg resides atop a mountain. Link's Awakening establishes its story and mystery right away. Link is shipwrecked on an unknown shore. He must recover himself and his possessions, and explore this island and the mysteries of the egg on the mountain. Initially, there was no plan to make a Zelda game for the Game Boy. What Morita was tinkering on looked like a port of the SNES title A Link to the Past, and so that's what the team was initially trying to do. The game's engine was the same one that they used in the Japanese action-adventure game Kaeru no Tame ni Kana wa Naru, sometimes referred to as The Frog for Whom the Bell Tolls. The game features two princes, Prince Richard and Prince Sable, who go on a quest to save a princess and her kingdom. On their quest, they are turned into frogs, but gain the ability to alternate between these transformations. The game is like Link's Awakening in that it has both top-down elements and side-scrolling, but it exclusively puts the world exploration in top-down view and the dungeons in a side-scrolling view. There are other major differences in the game mechanics as well, in that the battles in the game are automatic and out of the player's control. Each time a battle begins, there is a tiny scuffle animation that displays, and a player must watch. Victory in battles is determined by your stats. If you lose, your stats are not high enough, and a player must explore the world for items to increase their stats. The development team made sure to include a reference to the frog for whom the bell tolls in Link's Awakening. In the Yukuku Prairie, southwest of Kennelet Castle, is Richard's villa. Inside is Prince Richard, who has the same name and same sprite design as the Prince Richard from The Frog for Whom the Bell Tolls. And his villa contains frogs as well as the game's overworld theme. It's unclear just how far the team got on Link's Awakening before it received its blessing to be turned into an official title, and how long the team thought it was simply going to be a port of A Link to the Past. You can still see many elements of Link to the Past in Link's Awakening, like the destructible bushes, the plump trees, the signposts, the musical instrument, the magic powder, the boss Moldrum, and the modified mob sub-bosses like Hymox and Staphlos. In Nintendo's official guidebook, which was published in July 1993, Miyamoto said the game spent a year and a half in development. This means Morita was tinkering with the game sometime around December 1991, which makes sense as the SNES release of A Link to the Past was November 1991 in Japan. But it isn't quite clear where the after-school club stops and where official development began. But maybe that's the point. In Link's Awakening, because development started in the spirit of being an after-school club, it continued that way. Former Nintendo president and CEO Satoru Iwata used to do a series of interview articles called Iwata Asks, where he would gain insight on development teams, games, and hardware. In an Iwata Asks with director Takashi Tezuka for Link's Awakening, Tezuka said they moved forward on the game in a freewheeling manner, and he said it was like they were making a parody of Zelda. In part, this is because Link's Awakening used elements from other games. A sprite that looked like Mario named Terran, who loved to collect mushrooms and gets transformed into a raccoon when he eats them. A chicken farmer who looks like Luigi, and other characters like Kirby, Goombas, Thwomps, Wart, a Yoshi doll, and the Mario enemy Chain Chomp, who actually joins Link for a brief time as a dog. Upon hearing all these characters used, Iwata asked, "Was that alright?" referring to getting permission to use those characters in a game. And Tezuka said,
It was the Game Boy, so we thought, oh, it'll be fine.
It was like their creative space was ungoverned by conventional rules. After all, it was just something they were playing around with after hours, right? It actually makes sense that this space was initially created with programmer Kazuaki Morita leading the charge. Morita is a man that likes to push his own limits, which seems to lend itself over to his games. In a rare interview with Morita in a February 2006 issue of Nintendo Power, he explained how exciting it was to work with the Famicom Disk System in Japan. When he was developing Doki Doki Panic, the game that would eventually become Super Mario Bros. 2 in America, he said,
Disk systems are common now, but then we were just exploring how the disk worked as an immense memory reservoir, which let me toy with many programming methods that I couldn't do with a ROM. Working with my design partner and getting very little guidance from others, we developed Doki Doki Panic in ways that really pushed my skills. I really matured as a programmer during that time. Very interesting work.
Morita is probably best known for his love of fishing, which has made it into a number of his games, including Link's Awakening. According to Morita, several of his coworkers enjoy fishing as much as he does, and take a big fishing trip together once a year. Morita is the kind of guy that loves fishing so much that he will try to put it in games whether he was told to or not. In another Iwata Asks for The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, Morita tells a story of when he was supposed to be working on a boss fight, but instead spent time working on his fishing game, going as far as trying to hide his screen by turning it off when the producer of the game would walk past him. It's not a conventional thing to put into a Zelda game, but Morita loved fishing so much he couldn't help himself. Not afraid of outlandish ideas either, director Tezuka had this concept of combining the game with elements from the hit TV show at the time, Twin Peaks. Tezuka described Twin Peaks as
a small number of characters in a small town. I wanted to make something that, while it would be small enough in scope to easily understand, it would have deep and distinctive characteristics.
According to the Link's Awakening strategy guide,
Tezuka-san suggested we make all the characters suspicious types like in the then popular Twin Peaks.
Twin Peaks was a TV series in the early 90s that followed the investigation of the murder of a young teenager named Laura Palmer in the tiny fictional town of Twin Peaks. There is a bizarre quality to Twin Peaks that shows up in the show's side characters. It's a part of the allure of the show. You're drawn to the screen because you don't know what you'll see next. It's uncomfortable.
Would you leave us, please? Jim. Would you leave us alone, please? Oh, certainly.
And funny.
Damn good coffee. And hot.
And engrossing, all at the same time. There's this moment in the Twin Peaks pilot episode where the camera breaks off from the main characters and switches to a shot of the hallway behind them. A kid, who never appears again, dances away from his locker and out of the shot. It's a bizarre moment that comes out of nowhere. And while you're thinking, what the hell was that? We are left with an empty hallway where we see the police officers entering at the back of the frame. Then Bobby Briggs, boyfriend of Laura Palmer, shows up in the next scene and is told someone is looking for him. These momentary oddities create a robust backdrop for the show's world so that when the main story and mystery continues, you're more curious about it. The same is true of Link's Awakening. The suspicious characters are full of intrigue. Like Old Man Elraya, who won't speak to you if you come into his house, but he has phone booths set up all over the world to give you clues about the game. Or the mini chain chomp that wants makeup, jewels, dresses, and accessories, even though she doesn't have a body. An alligator who goes hysterical over cans of dog food. Or the owl character who speaks with an endgame knowledge that you don't have. Early on, the owl appears and mentions your quest to wake the dreamer and says, "The Windfish is watching." But at the time, you don't know what the dreamer is or what the Windfish is. You can see how these types of characters could relate to Twin Peaks. Like the eccentric Nadine Hurley who wants to design silent drape runners so her curtain drapes will close quietly.
By God, those things will be quiet now.
Or the log lady who carries a log around with her wherever she goes.
One day, my log will have something to say about this.
And I don't even know what to say about this.
You know what this reminds us of? Really like this? It reminds us of Jimmy and Jenny down by the river?
But director Takashi Tezuka was not the only project member with bold ideas. Yoshiaki Koizumi wrote the Link's Awakening story and introduced for the first time a more story-based type of Zelda game. Koizumi was an oddity at Nintendo in that he originally wanted to be a film director and studied film, drama, storyboarding, and animation at university. But Koizumi's main desire was to make drama. In a 2007 interview with Wired magazine, he said,
"That was my goal, having a character in a certain kind of world, having him go through a series of actions to accomplish something, and creating a dramatic tension throughout that. And games seemed like a really good opportunity to create a kind of drama that you don't find in films.
For Link's Awakening, it was Koizumi's idea to implement the dream, the Windfish, and the island to the game's story. According to Koizumi,
That was my first experience doing the kind of work that we would now call event design. But there were not too many people at the time with expertise in that area, so I really had free reign to do what I wanted, so long as I didn't make Miyamoto angry.
but Koizumi wanted to push the story even further.
At that time, I felt like I came up with this entire scenario and a backstory for Link, but nobody really seemed to care. They were always saying, let's not try to push the story forward too much. When you think about the whole Save the Princess storyline of games being one of Miyamoto's inventions, I don't think of that as a story so much as it is a goal. It's a way of creating a situation. There's not necessarily a build-up and a resolution of a deeper kind like you'd find in a novel. It's just a situation that motivates the players.
So Koizumi spent his career sneaking the elements he wanted into games. Koizumi had a variety of roles like system director, game designer, character design, and director on titles like Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Mario Sunshine, and Mario Galaxy. Koizumi
Always liked the idea of you coming upon another character and hearing little bits of conversation that slowly begin to reveal different parts of the story.
which he tried to work into Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. You can see this in the story of Anju and Kafei in Majora's Mask. Anju and Kafei are engaged to be married, but their plans get interrupted when Kafei is turned into a boy and his marriage ceremony mask is stolen. However, there is a long quest chain to reunite them. For one part of the quest chain, if you are in the Stockpot Inn at 2 p.m. on the first day, you can witness the postman giving Anju a letter from Kafei, which brings you to the next part of the story. Koizumi also wanted to give a backstory to the Lumas and Rosalina in Mario Galaxy, even though
It felt like telling a story in a Mario game was something that wasn't allowed.
in the library of the observatory, players have the option to listen to Rosalina's story. Koizumi wanted a reason for the Lumas and Rosalina to be out there in space. He crafted a story about loss, self-discovery, and friendship. Two friends, a girl named Rosalina and a star child named Luma, go on a quest in the galaxy to find their lost mothers. But no matter how much they search, they can't find them, and instead decide to become a family themselves. It's a touching parable for growing up, the acceptance of the loss of our own parents, and the potential loneliness that comes from braving the world without them. The bravery it takes to forge your own destiny, and start a family of your own, and all the heartache it costs us along the way. It's a bold story to tell in a Mario game, but it's exactly the kind of story Koizumi is compelled to tell. When the after-school team acquired Koizumi for Link's Awakening, they thought,
It looked like he'd be good at creating a story, so we lured him into our after-school club. Koizumi-san was in charge of the opening movie and main story. He's a romantic, and I think that shows in Link's Awakening. He was in charge of the whole flow of the story.
without the opening cinematic, the game could be structured more around a goal than a story. You could just have dungeons, instruments, and an egg that cracks open and ends the world, but the substance between the elements would be missing. There's this moment in the game where Link sort of goes on a date with Mioune. She invites him to sit down on this log in her favorite spot, and she tells Link about all her dreams. She wonders where the coconut trees come from, and what is beyond the sea. She tells Link that she dreams of being a seagull who could fly and explore as far as she wants. For all the adventures Link has been on, there hasn't really been a moment of reflection or longing like this. It's moments like these where Koizumi changes the gaming experience from a goal into a relatable story. And later on, it makes the reveal of Koholint Island and the Windfish more impactful. Past the midway point of the game, in the southeast corner of the map, you must enter the ancient ruins and fight Armos in order to acquire a key for the next dungeon. Immediately you can see there is something different about these ruins. Much of the music in the game is fast-paced, and when it slows down as it does in the ruins, you know something unique is about to happen. For all the grandeur of the design of the structure outside and the path leading up to it, The ancient ruins is just 3 rooms: an entrance, a room containing a mini boss fight, and a dark room with a tablet on the north side of the wall. I still remember finding this tablet on the wall when I played through it as a kid.
To the finder, the Isle of Koholint is but an illusion. Human, monster, sea, sky, a scene on the lid of a sleeper's eye. Awake the dreamer, and Koholint will vanish much like a bubble on a needle. Castaway, you should know the truth.
I just read it over and over. The owl that had followed me throughout the game had talked about the sleeping Windfish, but never mentioned that the island would vanish. How often in a game are you told that the world you're in and the people you've interacted with are all an illusion? That anyone you saved or helped wasn't even real in the first place, and that if you succeed, you will be destroying them. In previous Zelda games, there was a series of goals to be met with an adventure in between. Each goal you acquired was just a checkpoint you passed on a potential sprint to the ending. And while Link's Awakening is still that, the Ancient Ruins is a moment where there is something beyond the goal. A moment that forces you to consider the game's story. It may not seem like much, but to people looking for story like Koizumi, it's everything. It was fortunate that Miyamoto, who was less of a fan of story elements in Zelda games, was busier with another project during Link's Awakening's development. Though listed as a staff member, Miyamoto mostly did testing during the later stages of development, which may have bolstered the freedom and diversity that Tezuka, Koizumi, Morita, and the rest of the team were able to bring to the project. I don't want to say anything negative about our father of Mario and Zelda, who aren't in Japan, but it is clear from a few excerpts of interviews just how much power and influence Miyamoto has. In another, Iwata asks, Iwata, president and CEO of the company, was talking about the development of The Legend of Zelda Spirit Tracks. According to Iwata,
Miyamoto was tied up with new Super Mario Bros. Wii for so long that it looked like he didn't have a chance to see the new Zelda for quite a while. Some of us were worried that you wouldn't make the release date, but when I asked Miyamoto-san about it, he said it looked fine, so I was enormously relieved.
The implication being that if Miyamoto had been displeased, it would have lengthened the development time for the game. In another story, Yoshiaki Koizumi was developing another game before Miyamoto pulled him off his project to put him on Majora's Mask. According to Koizumi, his game was canned. Both Koizumi and Miyamoto laugh about this, but it seems like at least in some small ways, games live or die by Miyamoto's words. For the development of Majora's Mask, Koizumi said that among the staff they would whisper, "Miyamoto hasn't said anything. He will eventually, right?" So when Takashi Tezuka says that while working on Link's Awakening,
Miyamoto was busy with something and didn't pay us much attention.
given another set of circumstances where Miyamoto was more involved, it's hard to say what might have changed with the game's direction being loomed over by such a powerful influence. Tezuka goes on to say,
I remember that we made Link's Awakening in a really peculiar frame of mind. We began in the free spirit of an after-school club, so the contents are quite unrestrained. If you look at it, you can tell.
Perhaps there is a metaphor embedded in Link's Awakening's story and world. In the game, the Windfish isn't just asleep, it's trapped in its slumber. Nightmares from another world are keeping the Windfish asleep and using its dreams to create and enslave the world of Koholint Island. There is a lot more to game development than the sum of its parts. It's not just a designer, director, and programmer working together to create a vision. It can also be a history and an expectation of a game series, or a company, or a particular producer's vision. It's a series of rules and clearances and traditions or credos. It's a world that seems free, but is actually under the control of various forces. When Link wakes up the Windfish, the people and the island may cease to exist, but through Link's actions, the Windfish is free. Sometimes, even when our actions and results are good, there are still more ideas we could implement to make things better. Maybe there don't need to be set rules to how we create things. Maybe it's fine to stare out onto the horizon and let our imaginations be as free as a seagull in the sky. to soar high above the clouds in our freedom. And remember that at the end of every single beautiful dream we have is another awakening. So there's this guy listed in the staff interview who did dungeon design, and he goes, "Do you think Taryn and Marin are father and daughter? It never says that in the game. Most importantly, Marin calls Taryn by name. Could she actually be a little gold digger?"